Hello, and welcome to the Church of the River. My name is Lindsay Donnelly-Bullington, and I usually get to spend most of my time with this church kind of behind the scenes. But today I have the delight of filling in for our usual Reverend Sam Teitel, and I'm so excited to join y'all today from behind the pulpit. With no announcements today, our order of service will now begin. Our call to worship this morning comes from Richard S. Gilbert, who writes, "We meet on holy ground, brought into being as life encounters life, as personal histories merge into the communal story, as we take on the pride and pain of our companions, as separate selves become community. How desperate is our need for one another, our silent beckoning to our neighbors, our invitations to share life and death together, our welcome into the lives of those we meet, and their welcome into our own. May our souls capture this treasured time. May our spirits celebrate our meeting in this time and in this space, for we meet on holy ground." And we light our chalice today, knowing that even though we aren't spending this time physically in the same space, still we meet on holy ground. Amen.
Good morning, friends. I've missed being with you, both in person and virtually this summer. And this week marks a transition of sorts. It's the Sunday when we move from summer mode back into what feels more like a new church year. In our part of the world, school is starting, if not tomorrow, then next week. And with COVID-19 still causing illness and chaos, the beginning of the church year feels both unfamiliar and familiar at the same time. Every new year is the chance to begin again. You're not the same person you were this time last year, and neither am I. But still, some things are the same. One of those things is how our community, all the people who are part of the Church of the River, and all the people who are part of our Unitarian Universalist faith movement, those people are still holding each other together with love and compassion, and hopefully a good measure of kindness and grace, this year and every year. If your family has been a part of the Church of the River for these past few years, you probably know that Lindsay, our preacher today, is also one of our faith formation facilitators. Lindsay's been teaching our children both before the pandemic and all throughout the pandemic. Lindsay knows a lot about how UUs encourage each other, and she'll be sharing some ideas about how we keep going when we begin a new journey or when we start over again at a new stage in our journey. One of the things that Lindsay shared with me this week is that she likes the idea of geese flying in formation as a way to move through a journey. Maybe you've heard this story or idea before. It's pretty popular. When geese fly overhead, if you've ever noticed, especially in the time of migration, when geese, like so many other birds, fly to warmer areas for their winter, you'll notice that they fly in a V. There's one leader at the point of the V, and there are two lines of birds flying behind, so that from our perspective on the ground, it looks as though a V is moving through the sky overhead. Now, there are at least 5 lessons that leadership experts tell us we can learn from these geese. First, go together. Flying in formation is 70% more effective than flying alone. It's easier to go anywhere with friends than to go alone, no matter where you're headed. Number 2, we are all connected and we need each other. It may look like there's only one leader in the formation, but really, when the lead bird gets tired, it will move back and another bird will come to the front to be the leader. This is because the energy or lift created by the birds in the front hold the birds in the back up so that they stay together, but they also get a chance to rest. The birds in the back don't have to flap quite so hard when they're in the back. The third lesson, we have to encourage each other. The sounds of wings flapping in front and the honking of the birds in the back encourage the birds in the front to keep going. And since sometimes we're leaders and sometimes we're followers, all of us are better off when we encourage each other. Number 4, we take care of each other when one of us falls. When one goose becomes sick or wounded, 2 drop down out of the formation and follow it. They stay and help and protect it. They'll stay together until all of them are strong and ready to begin again. Then they take off. Sometimes they're able to catch up to the first group. Sometimes they just form a new formation and carry on in the same direction and to the same destination. Finally, we take time to rest and refresh ourselves. Geese fly to warmer, sunnier areas to rest and recuperate before the next season. And so it is with our community. We build the beloved community with values like unity, interdependence, encouragement, loyalty, and rejuvenation at the center. From that place, we begin again. Welcome to a new year at the Church of the River. You are beloved, you are sacred, you are powerful. Go in peace.
Our first reading this morning comes from Octavia Butler's wonderful Parable of the Sower, which I just had a chance to read alongside some of my soon-to-be fellow seminarians, so I'm excited to share some of that wisdom with you. Octavia Butler writes, "Create no images of God, accept the images that God has provided. They are everywhere, in everything. God is change. Seed to tree, tree to forest, rain to river, river to sea, grubs to bees, bees to swarm. From one, many, from many, one. Forever uniting, growing, dissolving, forever changing. The universe is God's self-portrait." Our second reading this morning comes from Kester Bruin's Signs of Emergence. She writes, "From Sarah's barren waste to Christ's embryonic advent, God teaches us that change comes through evolution. That time must be taken, that we must stop, wait, and face up to where we are. That if we are to see change that is transformative rather than tactical, we must open our fists, relinquish the old, and learn to live with emptiness, grieve, admit God's freedom, and draw hope. The structures have been deconstructed, the plot cleared. Now we must wait and wonder where from newness will come." From the writings of the second part of Isaiah, Brueggemann speculates that only through the practice of memory will possibility emerge. Without some form of memory, the sentence you are reading or hearing would make no sense. It is only our ability to hold the however recent past in mind and bring it to bear on our present that allows us to learn, to advance, to understand, to converse, to relate in depth, to love, to move forward from nothing into something. Without memory, we become imprisoned in absolute present, unaware of the direction we have come from, and therefore what direction we are heading in. Without memory, there can be no momentum, no discernible passage of time, and therefore no movement or velocity. We become stuck in the ways things are with no options, unable to appreciate that things might have been different in the past and therefore can be in the future. She continues, having waited for so long for God to come to us, what did we expect? A marching army, a blinding flash of divine lightning, striking the wicked and raising the righteous, graves a-cracking and trumpets sounding. Think again, God says, think again. Free your minds from the old, empty them. I am doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? The God who created evolution and dreamt up emergence knew the only door into this world was through birth. God knew that the only way to overcome the crisis of representation and communication was to give up on the top-down approach and be reborn, to reemerge and change things by evolution from the bottom up. We must reemerge and grow up again in the place we are meant to serve. Understand it, learn from it, be in it, love it, listen to it, wait 30 years before speaking to it. We must, like God, become dedicated to change by evolution. Our prayer this morning comes from the group Infleshed, and this is their litany for becoming. To become is a lifelong process. Nothing is constant, not even the self. We evolve in the midst of narratives meant only for some and ways of being made narrow by fear and power. We must then have the courage to listen to the truth of our own lives, to the wisdom that comes from within, responding without resistance or need to control, but with welcome and curiosity. This is what ensures our becoming is an unfolding of our truest self. This lifelong labor cannot be carried out alone. It requires help from friends and lovers, family and creaturely companions who bear witness to what makes us come alive, and to say, listen, look, feel, pay attention to that. This is loving and being loved. Telling the stories, sharing in the memories, giving thanks for the relationships, understandings, and experiences past that have shaped us to this day. This is loving and being loved. Celebrating new beginnings that excite, holding risks together, leaning into unknowns with the promise of support and companionship. This is loving and being loved. Listening to the future, calling uniquely to each of us in the midst of all of life's noise, helping one another to find our place in the shared labor of collective life, supporting each other in what it is the world's ache is asking from us. This is loving and being loved. There is no me without you. We shape one another. The sacred that birthed us weaves our lives together so that we can only find ourselves through shared becoming. For my journey and all its winding ways, for yours, for all the saints who labored for what is, all the kin whose lives made ours possible, for all those yet to come, for whom living our truths today will mean breaking possibilities open for them tomorrow. We pause, we give thanks, we acknowledge. This is loving and being loved. time has now come in our service for the offering to be given and received. The instructions to do so will be briefly on your screen, and we always accept support through our social media. I graduated from Rhodes College this past May, and I walked across the stage only a couple of hours before the graduates from the year prior had their postponed ceremony. In the days before both graduations, I visited with a friend from the class of 2020, a biology major, and it marked her first return to Memphis since her last semester had been spent virtually. We sat in Overton Park and pointed out our favorite trees, but our conversation kept getting cut off by the calls of so many birds, and by my friend's insistence to identify the species. I said she was a biology major, after all. Her face would light up, and she'd say, "You'd never see one of those in Texas." Her trademark enthusiasm was contagious for someone to whom bird calls are largely indistinguishable and undecipherable. As someone who stayed far away from the science departments as possible at school, I nonetheless was regularly reminded of the particular wonders of Memphis's nature. In my urban studies classes, our conversations would so often turn to the unique asset of Memphis's green spaces. I remember an art installation put up along A.W. Willis in my old neighborhood while I was in school, a geometric abstraction of our tree canopy called Treedom. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. These words ushered me out of the sanctuary of Neshoba Church until I was old enough to sing youth out with them myself. My roots are planted solid in Memphis. My wings are taking me to seminary at Boston University. My roots will nourish me well on this path. Earlier this spring, the board of the Church of the River generously agreed to sponsor my candidature for ordination. This sermon today, then, is a couple of things. This is first an introduction for those of y'all I haven't had the chance to meet yet. Like I said, I spend most of my time here at this church in the background or with the youth. So that means I haven't had a chance to meet a lot of y'all yet. This gift from the church means I'm not letting y'all forget my face. I'll be around throughout my education here, again, in this pulpit, and I'm really excited to grow with and through this church. This is a thank you to the board, to the congregation, and to Memphis. And this sermon is also a beginning point, a start to some of my theological questions and inspirations that have filled my spirit in my time at Memphis and with this church. My roots are planted solid in Memphis, but they don't stand alone. They reach through the soil and find wisdom from the roots of those oak trees in New Orleans that Naima Penniman talks about, as quoted in Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy. Penniman says, "When Hurricane Katrina slammed into the Gulf Coast, almost everything lost its footing. Houses were detached from their foundations, trees and shrubbery were uprooted, signposts and vehicles floated down the rivers that became of the streets. But amidst the whipping winds and surging water, the oak tree held its ground." How, Penniman asks? Instead of digging its roots deep and solitary into the earth, the oak tree grows its roots wide and interlocks with other oak trees in the surrounding area. And you can't bring down 100 oak trees bound beneath the soil. She continues, how do we survive the unnatural disasters of climate change, environmental injustice, over-policing, mass imprisonment, militarization, economic inequality, corporate globalization, and displacement? We must connect in the underground, my people. In this way, we shall survive. The oak trees stood through the hurricane because of their shared root system, because of community. They survived through intentional and exceptional modes of holding one another in community through times of collective hardship and disaster. Church of the River was the first church I ever went to, before I have memories of this space and this community. Since I started working at the church in the early part of last year, I didn't have much time to spend re-immersing myself in this community before our operations became virtual. I've learned the most about the lives of this church's members through a computer screen and through curating the pictures that y'all send in each week on different themes. This new way of being in community with each other has taken some reluctant getting used to, of course, but it's absolutely a strength. Our roots as a compassionate, close-knit but open and thriving congregation bind us so that in the face of catastrophic change to the way we engage with one another and learn with one another, still we stand tall. I'm proud to be part of this community, which has been remarkably strong in the face of community trauma and disaster. Despite the many areas of our society that rush back to so-called normalcy, we've pressed on to best accommodate the developing science. Perhaps us Unitarian Universalists should be particularly equipped to recognize the fractal nature of our lives inherently tied in various communities of various sizes. Perhaps us Unitarian Universalists should be particularly equipped to recognize that it does make a difference to structure our communities on the principles of resilience, empathy, and justice, even when our world more largely doesn't, as a rule. My roots don't just hold me close, our roots hold us close. And two, our wings set us free. Cat Aaron shares also an emergent strategy that when Canada geese are migrating, they take turns at the front of the V, turns being the leader, the weight carrier, and being the follower, the rester. Adrienne Murray Brown continues, when a goose is injured during migration, 2 geese will land with it and stay until it is healed or it dies, then catch up with their flock. Flocking is fundamentally about decentralizing the effort for safety and trusting leadership to come from any edge of the flock. These birds share the burden and the gift of leadership to usher the larger community of which they are a part into a new world. A migrating thrush species likely notices some meteorological phenomenon our science hasn't pointed us towards yet, and we've observed that they're better predictors of hurricane severity than what we have now. The birds migrate away from severe hurricanes faster than we can track them, traveling in this alternating, decentralized, interdependent flock. Common roots nourish that inner ability to ground, to center, to learn, to grow. And flocks act as a space to enact and embody that growth, to bring about radical change among community without allowing one person's faltering to bring them out of community or to lead everyone astray. Octavia Butler, whose words we heard earlier in this service, writes in Parable of the Sower about a decreasingly distant future, set in the mid-2020s, where the world has been so irreparably and drastically ravaged by climate change that urban life is a constant and literal fight for survival. In this world, teenage Lauren Olamina journals her theological discoveries that often recall her idea that God is change, and that we do not worship God, we shape God. Whether intentionally or otherwise, whether towards justice or otherwise, whether towards human survival or otherwise, we shape God as we shape change. She calls this collection of her discoveries Earthseed. The destiny of Earthseed, Butler writes, is to take root among the stars. Wings set us free, to the sky, to the stars, to new worlds. Just last month, Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos made it not to the stars, but a little bit closer than I've ever been. But this leg of the billionaire space race doesn't look quite like my Earthseed. Instead, in their suborbital journeys, I see a refusal to shape change on Earth in this time of momentous uncertainty and hurt. I see these trees uprooted and removed from community, a bird abandoning the injured goose. Lauren calls her development of Earthseed discovery. I think about that cry I've heard increasingly often since last summer, that cry that says that another world is possible. I think those other worlds are ours to discover and then to embody. If God is change, another world is not only possible, but inevitable. I've learned great things from the flocks that I've been a part of. The fractal flocks of our church, Unitarian Universalism more largely, our global flock. My discernment of my call to ministry has been about my desire to be part of this flock working to find new worlds. And this is what I offer in my brief turn leading the flock. We know that worsening hurricanes and storms accompany climate change. We know the longer this pandemic stretches, the greater the death toll will be, the more likely more strains like the Delta variant will emerge. But we are not helpless, and we are not without hope or strategy or chance for survival. As the storms get worse, the more we'll need our common root system. We must grow and strengthen our system, our community, in order for us all to stand tall and avoid our own downfall and any resultant destruction it brings around. And we must do this now, because it doesn't look like the storm is about to let up. We sink and outstretch our roots during the storm because we aren't guaranteed that the clouds will part and the sun will come to evaporate the groundwater and firm the soil again. We must build our roots during the storm, not after. Our roots will hold us close and our wings will set us free. We shape God, and God is change. We shape change, and we are aligned collectively towards justice, equity, and compassion. We can build those possible new worlds in line with our principles. And in fact, we must, because other people are building new worlds too. They're building worlds for billionaires in suborbital space explorations and leaving deserted, plague-ridden lands behind. But the destiny of our Earthseed is to take root in the stars. Another world is inevitable. I don't think I'm making it to outer space in my lifetime, and I don't really hope to. I like this planet a lot. I've learned a lot from it, and I've got plenty more to learn, from the trees and the birds especially. What would it mean for us to take root in the stars here on Earth? Not to leave, but to build new worlds, to build new Earths here on this one. Amen, and blessed be. For our benediction today, I remember the words of our first reading by Kester Bruin. Without memory, there can be no momentum. As we all shape change, as we all shape God, let us mindfully remember. Remember what has sustained us in this time. Remember what our pain has felt like. Remember what took us by surprise. And let our memory propel our action. For this is how we shape God towards justice, compassion, and survival. Go in peace.
Gonna lay down my burden down by Everybody